Welcome to the Women Inspire Aspire podcast. In this podcast, I'm talking to Dr. Pratibha Narayanan about peer learning.
Hi, Dr. Pratibha. Thank you so much for accepting my invite to appear in the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's really exciting to be able to have a conversation about what I do. And yeah, I'm doing really well today. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Could you please go ahead and tell a bit about yourself, your background, where do you live, and what you do?
Sure. I'm originally from Kerala. I grew up in Delhi, went to school, college in Delhi University, and then I went to the Max Planck Research School in Germany to do my master's and my PhD, where I studied neuroscience. And that was purely because I was extremely passionate about biology as a young student back in Delhi University. Post my PhD, I wanted to explore another domain and I wanted to explore some other area. And that's how I ended up coming back to India and joining the Teach for India Fellowship, where I taught for 2 years in a school in Bombay. And then I started my journey with Involve, which is the organization that I currently run. It's been 5 years since then. And today I'm based out of Bangalore. The team at Involve works out of Bangalore. And yeah, that's what I do today.
Great. So it's wonderful to know about your fantastic and very timely mission of peer learning in India. It's fostering the student agency and self-reliance through peer-based learning in India, which has immense potential. So let's explore on that. Before that, I would like to ask you about the neuroscience part and how it is related to the biology, because it sounds interesting to me. So could you please explain a bit about that?
Sure. So I was a student of biology in school. So I had in biology in grade 11 and 12, and that was where my first interest in human anatomy and the understanding of the human body sparked. And from there, I went to study biochemistry at Delhi University, where one of my professors was someone who introduced us to neuroscience as a subject because there were parts of our curriculum which came from there. And so neuroscience is essentially the study of the nervous system. So it studies the brain, it studies the nervous system, and it studies everything around that. And there are various facets to neuroscience. There is the molecular aspects, there is the more psychological aspects, there is the behavioral aspects. And I was interested in all of them. I was very curious to understand why human beings approach the world as they do. What are the ways in which they approach the world? Why do they make decisions the way they do? So all of those questions were sitting with me while I was doing my graduation. And then immediately after graduation, I had this opportunity to actually pursue the subject as a master's and then a PhD later. And that's how it happened. So during my master's and my PhD, I became more focused on molecular neuroscience. So that's what I studied. During my PhD, I worked on the sense of touch, which is how do mammals, including human beings, perceive touch and what is the proteins responsible for us being able to identify between different types of surfaces and so on. So that was what I worked on during my PhD, where I was able to discover some of those proteins. So that was the work that I did in neuroscience. But my overall interest in neuroscience was really about how does an organism, a living being with a nervous system, process and access the world and what all goes behind that. So that was the core area of interest.
Wow, how exciting. So, if you let me talk about medicine or science, I will keep asking you questions about that. Just one more follow up question on that. How do you see death? How does the nervous system relate to death? Do you have any opinions on that?
So fascinating question. I haven't really thought about it so much, but I think being a very sort of I'm somewhat of a rationalist kind of person, and for me, death is sort of just the absence of life. And so for me, once the basic features of life or things that give life to any life form stop existing, that for me is the end, and that for me is what I would describe as death. So in case of human beings, it is for me once the vital functions in the body stop functioning, that becomes for me death, I haven't really ever thought about it from a very metaphysical or a spiritual lens to really have much of an opinion on it.
No, I was just curious about the nervous system and how it's related to death, more than a metaphysical or spiritual
Right.
aspect of it. So I was just curious if you had some insights about how the nervous system stop working during the death, or whether it's the death that happens and then the nervous system stops working, or the nervous system stops working and then the death happens. What are the sequence of things that happen? So anyway, my curiosity has no limits. So let's shift gears and talk about involve. Now, what specific experiences or observations led you to the realization that a lack of student agency and self-reliance is a critical challenge in the Indian education system, and how did you get started with that?
So it's, I think, a combination of an experience of agency and a lack of it that led me to this particular work that I do. So in my own personal life, from childhood, right from schooling to college to everything, I had a lot of agency in my life. My parents, my school ecosystem, teachers around me, or generally the adults around me, really created space for me to take ownership, a space for me to make decisions, and space for me to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and kind of redo things and learn through that process. And also, there was an extreme amount of trust that was placed in me towards me being able to make the right choices, negotiate with my life situations to be able to solve challenges. And that is what eventually led me to be able to pursue the things that I did, move, whatever that I was able to achieve was really a result of that agency. And that agency also had many aspects of skills that I was able to build throughout my childhood, whether that was communication because I participated in a lot of activities in school, whether that was collaboration because I worked with a lot of clubs and so on throughout school and college. So a lot of those skill sets also kept evolving. So that was my personal experience, that what having agency could do for me. And then when I went to teach for India and I was teaching in a school in Jogeshwari in Bombay, I could see the other side of it play out, where students in my classroom had so little agency over their lives and over the choices that they wanted to make, that everything was determined for them by either circumstances or their communities or many other reasons, and there was very little people in their life who believed that they could do what they wanted and that they could go out and achieve things that they wanted to. And there I saw how that led them to constrain their own belief systems. Even though some of my kids were brilliant, but they still felt constrained by even some of the doubts and questions that they felt they had, saying, can I do it, am I really fit for this? And that both of these experiences were a contrast study for me, saying I had all of this and so I was able to do so many things. It wasn't that I had some exceptional abilities, I was not born with a lot of those talents, but the ecosystem around me allowed me to build them for myself, while my students didn't have that opportunity. And that's what brought me to involve, to say, how do we ensure that every child, and particularly children from the most resource constrained, most marginalized, most vulnerable environments, have those opportunities, have those experiences, have people around them that trust them to say, if you want to, you can. I think that whole experience shaped the design for what we today do at Involve.
Wonderful. So that gives a very clear picture of your background, the experiences that you came across, and what led to you doing this. Now, what is your approach to peer-based learning? How is it unique or different from the other initiatives in this space, both in India and globally? What specific model of peer-based learning your organization employs, and what are the core components and principles of it?
For us, when we think about learning, there is a certain image of classrooms, of schools that comes to mind, where students are sitting in organized rows, one behind the other, the teacher in front of them, and them receiving knowledge, information, skills, whatever. And there is typically, in fact, in many schools that you will see that children are actively told, don't talk to each other, listen to the teacher, don't have side conversation. What we say is that that's not normal way of learning. The most normal and natural way of learning for a child is for a child to be part of social groups to be able to learn. And that's where the idea comes in, saying children can learn really strongly through experiences with their peers. And can we create those spaces deliberately and intentionally? So, across the world and even in India, peer learning or peer based learning has been a fairly common concept. It's not something we invented. The only gap that we sensed was that it was never happening in a deliberate manner. It was never happening with a intentionality. It was always something that was done when there was nothing else to do. And what we therefore suggested when we worked with schools or when we started our work with schools was, can we bring in some level of intentionality and structure to this process of peer learning so that we make sure that there are specific times in the school, days of a child where they're actually learning socially, where they're learning collaboratively, where they're learning with their friends. And that became the differentiator. And gradually, as we started making this practice in our government schools, today we work with almost 7,000 government schools across the country, and more than 60% of them are running this program effectively. Now we are starting to see what else is being unlocked as a result of creating these peer spaces. So, as you can also imagine, naturally, when a child is in a group of their own peers, their fear of learning is reduced significantly. The fear of judgment, of failure, of hesitation is reduced significantly. And in that kind of a safe environment, learning pace accelerates. And so, what we've now started seeing is that learning pace in these peer groups or schools which are leveraging peer learning as a pedagogy is much higher than when they do not use it. So, these are things that we've seen starting to happen. Furthermore, we're starting to see how when students teach and learn with each other in groups, there suddenly starts to emerge a lot of natural leadership. There starts to emerge a lot of natural ownership, responsibility. And then, like I mentioned very early on, is that those skills that I was able to develop in my school, like communication, like collaboration, start to very naturally evolve as a result of this small shift in teaching and learning practice. And so now what we're seeing is just that intentionality and structure being brought into classrooms leads to not just academic improvements, but improved safe spaces, improved learning culture, and improved skills in our students. So that's the way we are currently seeing the model evolve.
Wonderful. You have implemented this in 7,000 schools. Congratulations on that. So, obviously, you would have faced issues or challenges when you're doing this. Specifically, how do you handle bullying, misinformation, or unequal participation within peer learning groups and so on? So, how did you address those issues?
Thank you so much for that question, and I think it's a very relevant question, and we've been trying to also figure out more about this particular topic. What we have seen from, again, our experience of students is that at least in the early grades, we see very little of these challenges come up in the groups, right? It is only in the slightly later ages, perhaps more towards grade 7, grade 8, where they're moving into that adolescence age group, where we start to see some of these things play out even. But what we've tried to do as part of our program itself, when we start the program, when we create our peer groups, there is an orientation and there is a certain norm setting that is done with the students, which basically gives them a sense of what their role in that group is going to be. So if there is a student leader or a student champion in a certain group, there is a training or a coaching or an orientation that's given to them that explains to them that their role is not about being a monitor, a leader of the group in the sense of having to police the group, but rather that their role is that of a role model. that of a coach, that is someone who has achieved a certain mastery and therefore who's able to translate that mastery to someone else. So that orientation and that early piece of training orientation, we've really found it useful for students to set the context. The other thing that we've also introduced is reflection, because like I said, that peer learning used to happen earlier also. It's just that intentionality and structure was missing. So one of the things in that structure is reflection, is do we go continually talk to the students to see how they are engaging with each other? Do we continually hold spaces for them to share what is working, what is not working? And that is where our true belief that children know what they need, and it's just the matter of creating a space where they're able to express it and that we value that expression to act on it. So those intentional reflective spaces give us enough insights about what children are truly feeling. And even if they're feeling frustrated, even if they're feeling like their group is not doing something or that they are not able to handle things, those spaces are there for students to really vocalize those things. So a couple of these guardrails basically help us prevent some of those expected issues. But like I said in the beginning, that we haven't seen a lot of those. Like intuitively, we may think that that would happen, but when you walk into a classroom and when you see students with each other, they're a lot more inclusive of each other. They're a lot more caring and empathetic towards each other than we would think they are.
Okay, wonderful. So that's the qualitative part of things. Now let's get into the quantitative part. How do you measure success? Because data is so important in measuring success in any public work, not just education. So how do you use data or technology to measure the quantitative aspects, or what are the metrics that you use to measure how much success you have made and what are the areas that you could improve in, etc.?
Absolutely. So I'm coming from a research background, so my strong belief is that what gets measured gets done. So there is a very strong interest in us to keep continuously measuring, both monitoring and evaluating what our programs are doing, how they're operating, what people are feeling about them, and how do we keep improving, what do we need to change, what do we need to make better, and so on. So there's a lot of work that we do on identifying the right kind of tools, identifying the right kind of practices to be able to measure that. So far, we've done a couple of different types of measurements. So one of the direct measurements that we do is saying whether having peer learning in classrooms leads to direct improvements of academic outcomes. And we've measured this for foundational numeracy outcomes in early grades. And we've also done control studies, which means we've studied schools where this program was running regularly versus schools where it wasn't. And we found that in schools that introduced peer learning 3 to 4 times a week over an academic year, they saw 15% improvement in foundational numeracy of students of primary grades compared to the control schools. And we're also currently running some larger studies to truly show this attribution that indeed having this program leads to better academic outcomes. So that's one measurement that we do. The second measurement that we do is around the skills of the students participating in the program. So we have developed some internal tools. We're currently in the process of developing some standardized tools that can help us measure traits like confidence, self-belief, resilience, communication among our students and seeing how they're shifting. What we've seen again so far in our data is that 4 out of 5 of our students show at least a 1 level improvement in these skills over a course of an academic year through participation in peer learning. So these are some of the almost evaluation based metrics that we look at, but we also do a lot of continuous monitoring of our programs where we collect a lot of data around output levels, which means how is the program getting implemented, how are the stakeholders really feeling about it, what are the challenges that they face in implementation, who is implementing it really well and how, who is not able to implement it and why. So a lot of this monitoring data is what we continue to collect on a continuous basis to inform ourselves. And the third aspect that we also do, because we work closely with the government system, because our belief is that it is ultimately the government who has to provide for an excellent education for every child. And we are enabling that system to bring innovation or to drive certain things to the ground level. So what we also want to do is integrate with the measurement and evaluation systems of the government. So we do work closely with the government to say how do they also monitor some of the things that we are looking for. So we ask government officials when they go on school visits to also look at the quality of the program, to report back on what they think is working, what is not working. So that's the other piece that we also use through which we get a lot of data.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What is your revenue model and how do you ensure the financial sustainability of the enterprise in the long run?
So we're a non-profit organization. So the model is run on philanthropy. So we do raise our money from CSR, from individuals, and a few awards and grants that we receive. We don't charge for our services. So the service that we do with the government is entirely paid for by philanthropic capital. What we do try to do, because we want eventually for the programs or the interventions that we drive to be sustainable. So we do work with the government to figure out how do we take the government's budget and unlock that towards some of the programs, because ultimately these programs are serving the outcomes of the government. So for example, when we run peer learning program towards improving foundational literacy and numeracy, we see how the budgets that the government has, let's say a district has or a state has, on foundational literacy and numeracy, how can they be leveraged towards the trainings that need to be done, or how can we align our trainings to what the government is already doing to reduce the costs that we have to bear, and so that operating expenses remain lower from our end, and that we more build the sort of a knowledge partner muscle to the government. So that's the way we're looking at not, building a parallel system to the government, but rather seeing how we can co-opt within the government's work.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm from a tech background and especially from the quality side. And I believe in two things. One is attention to detail, and the other thing is about big picture thinking. So you have been working with around 7,000 schools, and obviously it's not enough for India because India is such a big nation, and
Yeah.
you would also want to expand your work further. So, what are your plans for scalability? That's from the big picture thinking side. At the same time, how do you ensure that the attention to detail part of this quality of the work not getting diluted when you scale, right? Because when you
Yeah.
try to increase the number of people that you reach out to, obviously
Yeah.
there'll be some dilution in the quality. So how do you balance this? What are your experiences?
Yeah. Great question. So just to sort of share how we have scaled. So we started involved in 2018, where we were working with just about 10 schools. And today we've grown to 7,000 schools. And we have focused on what we call economies of scale. So our programs, when we do them directly, are a certain cost. And then when we do them at scale, that cost becomes 100 times less because we're able to leverage the economies of scale. In terms of how we approach scale, so like I mentioned, we understand that the most scalable education initiative in this country is the government, and they have all of the resources necessary to be able to reach the 1 million public schools in India today because they run them. So our idea of scale is to really work with the government, is to embed programs within government's ecosystem, and therefore reach out to the entire public school ecosystem. So how we've done that is we started out working with a block level, which is an administrative unit. So we started working with the block education officer, and then through them working at the block. Then we realized that the block is too small a unit, so we moved to district as the unit of change. And today we work with 6 such districts, And the way we work is through a cascade model. So we work with the district education departments and the teacher training, the diets at the district. And through them, we work with the mentor cadre, the headmaster, and then the teacher through a cascade model of trainings, ultimately reaching the classrooms. So that is how, in our direct model, if we have 25 team members working with 3,000 students, when we work with the government, we have 5 team members working with close to 1 lakh students. So that is the way we are able to scale the model. And the idea further is also to see how do we go from the district to the state model, saying how we leverage the state's machinery, because again, the state's government's educational ecosystem also has a cascade. Can we embed our work into that cascade and therefore scale? The other way of scaling is also for us through ecosystem partnerships. So we work with multiple partners across the country, where through their programs, we also embed our programs and therefore also achieve a certain scale. So these are the two ways that we look at scaling. And when we work in these programs, we really focus on designing for scale rather than scaling what we know. So we have in-depth programs, but we don't directly just scale that program. We actually redesign the entire program for scale. So that's one of the key features of being able to scale effectively. In terms of the second part, where how do we ensure impact at scale, I completely agree that in the early years of scaling, because the cascade is what you're working through, it's a hub and spoke model almost sort of thing. There is loss of information and there is loss of, the kind of impact that we're able to make. So the 15% improvement that I told you earlier was in an in-depth model, but as we scale, we're starting to see that that improvement might drop down to a 10% or to a 8%. But the one thing that we're trying to do is to, like I said, ensure those monitoring processes are strengthened so that we are at least 100% confident about the activities to output level in the initial few years of scaling. And then we want to see how to improve our activities, to improve, let's say, our teacher trainings, what type of resources we can provide, how do we ensure that the last mile receives 100% of the information that the top tier has. And so all of these are something that we want to work on to ensure that the quality still arrives at the classroom level. Because ultimately, it really is about that. Even if I scale to 1 million public schools, but if the quality doesn't reach the last school, my work is not complete. And therefore, we also don't typically use a very in and out model, saying we don't just train and leave. We stay with a district for years where we train, we monitor closely, we shadow, we reverse shadow, we give feedback, we work closely with each part of the cascade. And until and unless we are able to, and that's why we still don't have a formal exit strategy yet with our district programs, because we're very early in the process and we realize that till we're not able to see that impact, we won't plan an exit strategy. So we're still on that journey, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I have a couple of more questions on this. One is, how do you get in the buy-in from the different stakeholders? Students is one
Yeah.
thing, but you also have teachers, you have parents, you have school administrators, policy
Yeah.
makers, and so on. So you already explained about the government part. I'm more
Yeah.
interested in the school administrators, the teachers, and the parents.
Yeah.
How do you convince them that your work is
Yeah.
improving the quality of education that their children are receiving?
Yeah. I think one thing that because what we talk about, the pedagogies that we talk about, the interventions that we talk about, are something that the teachers or the school administration or even the parents are familiar with. We're not introducing anything radically different. They sort of know what peer learning is, they're aware of what student leadership could look like, collaborative learning could look like. And so there's a sense of familiarity. And so it's been easier for us to get the first road in. The second thing that we've very intentionally done in our design is to ensure that whatever we designed is within the current roles of or each of these stakeholders. We don't make extra work for them. We don't say, here is one more thing you have to do. So if a teacher has to implement this in her classroom, she doesn't have to change a lot about what she's doing. She just has to change 1 hour of teaching practice, which also doesn't require a significant shift from her. And it's within school hours, it's within the mandate, and it's also achieving the outcomes that she is being assessed on. So again, coming back to what gets measured gets done, because the teacher is being assessed on academic outcomes of students. When she sees a program that helps her achieve those outcomes faster and easier, she takes it up. So what we've also realized is that people need to see action and smaller wins in order for them to be convinced. And what we try to do is show those small wins. We do quick assessments that show teachers that in peer groups, which are highly personalized, differentiated learning in nature, students learn faster. And so, when a teacher, specifically teachers in government schools, most of them are in multi-grade, multi-level classrooms. Head teachers face this problem a lot. There's single teacher with 200 students across all grades. In those cases, we're able to really show them quick wins when they introduce peer learning as a pedagogy, because they're like, okay, now instead of first only 10% of my class walking out learning, I now have this 10% who's learning, who are then helping the rest of the 90% learn, and therefore 100% of my class actually walks out learning. So when they start to see some of those shifts, they start to see the confidence in their students, they start to see their students happier and attending school more, because that's another common concern for head teachers and teachers, saying students don't come regularly. But peer learning leads to students attending schools more regularly. So, a lot of these small outcomes or early successes and wins have helped us get conviction from the school stakeholders. With parents, we do a lot of showcases that happen at the school level, at the block level, at the district level, where students come and share their journey. Instead of someone else telling on their behalf, students come and share what they have achieved. Students become leaders of change. And that gives parents a sense of hope, saying, oh, if my child can come stand up and talk to a crowd of 100 government officials, they must be doing something right. And that's where we've seen the buy-in of the parents show up, along with the support of the school administration. So these are a few things that have worked in our favor.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on all those aspects. I have one final question, if you don't mind. Why Bangalore? Are you focusing on South India or something to have your operations? Or because Teach for India was in Mumbai, you said, right? So you did your work in Mumbai. So why Bangalore now?
So I'll have to talk a little bit about where Involve started. So Involve started in Chennai actually, because my co-founders were alumni from IIT Madras, and they were still at IIT Madras when the organization started. And so we started out working in a few schools in Chennai. And then through with the help of one of our partner, mentor, almost parent organization, we had our first government school partnership in Bangalore, in Anekal block in Bangalore. And that's how in 2019 we began Bangalore operations. And since then, we've worked very closely in Bangalore region. And over the last year, we've also expanded to a couple of other districts in Karnataka. So we now work with Koppal and Chikballapur district in Karnataka. But at the same time, 2 years ago, we also significantly expanded our work to the north of the country, where we work now with Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. We work in two districts each in both the states. So our sort of states are spread across all of the country, and through partners, we actually work in even more states. We work in Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, Chhattisgarh. But Bangalore is base for us because a lot of our central team works out of here, including our fundraising team, communications, central design team, monitoring and evaluation teams, all based out of Bangalore because that's where we kind of set roots. And because our largest innovations hub is in Bangalore, which is in Anekal block, where we work with a very select set of schools, but really do all of our innovation, all of our understanding of the student experience, all of our understanding of what happens really in a classroom, all of that happens in Bangalore. So we wanted our central team to be very close to all of that learning, hence the choice of Bangalore.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. It would be great. I want to really personally visit the school sometime
Absolutely.
and see your work in action. So now for the fun stuff, as though you are not already having fun. What are your hobbies and interests, and what do you do for fun apart from work?
I think one work is really fun. We have a great team. So I think just hanging out with the team, um, doing fun stuff with the team. In fact, we have a team step back that's coming up in the next few days, and there's a lot of dance rehearsals, a lot of preparation of decorations and all of that happening. So that itself is a lot of joy and brings me a lot of joy. Besides that, I do really enjoy reading. I enjoy watching movies, documentaries. Especially a big fan of Hindi older movies, classics in some ways, as well as a lot of alternative cinema. I do read a little bit, have lost a little bit of that habit of late, but I enjoy reading a lot. Yeah, and at some point I picked up puzzling, so I was doing a lot of those large 1,000-piece puzzles. Um, but I also do dabble a little bit in art, so painting, all of that. So yeah, lots of things, not very focused on my hobbies as such.
Oh, I don't know how you have the patience to do these puzzles. um, Great. So let's talk about some societal issues that you care about. Not
Mhm.
education, not about the work that you're doing, but apart from that, what do you see around in the society and what bothers you and where do you want to work on? And if you're not already, and what kind of contributions would you like to make?
I think one area that has been kind of close to my heart is gender and how can we create spaces that are safe for women, both inside and outside the houses. How can we create cities that are safer for women? Um, because I travel quite a bit across the country, I've noticed very clear patterns in how women access public spaces, how much freedom they have in public spaces, and so on. And I think that's something that I do care about. I haven't really done much about it other than the work that we already do with our students in schools. But I think encouraging more girls and women to take over public spaces, to be out there, to really reclaim some of those spaces is something that I would really want to think about. And the second thing that's more recently something that I've become more aware of is the entire environmental crisis that we seem to be faced with. The kind of unpredictability, and this was something that I realized last year when in one of the districts that we work in, we saw months of school closures as a result of first heavy heat, then flooding, then severe winter. And each of these was abnormal or complete, it was a anomaly from what it was ever before. So, and that seems to become a consistent trend that we're seeing environment related disasters, environment related losses of livelihood, environment related losses of schooling and learning. And we don't seem to have a way forward. There's a lot of policy work that's happening, or there's a lot of conversation around that. But at a local level, there doesn't seem to be much shifting in patterns of consumption and patterns of behavior, in mindfulness around what we could do. And I think that's an area that I would actively want to start thinking about, because it also very much sits at the intersection of education. Because if the students in our schools today really start seeing this as a problem that needs to be dealt with, because they will be left to deal with it a few years from now and they will be most affected by it. So, how can we encourage the thinking from a local level to start on that? So, I think these are two big things that I'm currently sitting with.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yeah, students need to be aware of the environmental issues. The one big challenge that we have here is that these kind of environmental effects are not local really, because something happens somewhere far away. Like for example, some ice breaks in the Arctic region, and that leads to flooding in Kerala. So these are the kind of things that we have been observing. There is a lot of research that's going on how the Kerala rains have been happening,
Right.
and there's a lot of flooding in Idiki district and all that. And
Yeah.
they figured out that it's some disturbance in the Arctic which has led to this, and it's quite problematic because it's nothing you can do locally to address this. But having said that, when they become global citizens, maybe they might be able to have some influence into the policies of the governments at that point of time. So it's pretty important. Thank you for doing that great work, and please continue to do that. Regarding the women accessing the spaces, I was wondering if you have ever thought if improving the physical strength, like for example, going to a gym or learning the techniques and learning self-defense is part of the strategy of women becoming more confident and the ability to access the spaces, etc. What are your thoughts on
Um, it's an interesting question. I think it definitely adds to the confidence of women, especially given the reality of the situation is that these spaces do feel unsafe. If that wasn't the case, then I would say, oh, why should women learn self-defense? Everyone should just be conscious of each other. Everyone should just be respectful of each other's space, and therefore, spaces should be safe. But that is not the current reality. And given the current reality that there is some level of unsafety in spaces, I think uh, it would not be ill-advised for really everyone to learn self-defense, to understand how to protect their personal space. Um, but I don't think the entire onus should be on just the women to say, "Oh, you need to learn how to protect yourself and then go out." The onus is really on everyone around, um, all of us as women, men, community in general, to create safe spaces, to create spaces that allow people to be. And I think so the onus lies on both sides. So I wouldn't say that alone, so building self-defense or building physical strength alone is enough to solve this, because then again it feels like the onus is on just one party to solve it, which is not the case.
Yeah, it's not just as simple as increasing the physical ability, but it also there is a lot of education, there's a lot of mental changes in the
Right,
attitude of people
right.
that's required, that also needs to be brought in. So it's a combination of factors, and probably it's when the physical ability increases, and if there is a pushback, or if there is somebody who is if somebody is attacking women, the women is defending themselves very effectively, that brings a sense of mental change to the people around,
Yeah,
saying that, hey, you know what, you cannot do this anymore.
yeah,
So it's a combination of factor is what I think. But yeah, there
yeah.
is several things that needs to be done. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. Okay, so we are coming to the end of the podcast. Do you have any questions for me?
I think I'd love to understand what made you start this podcast? What was the inspiration behind doing this, and what are the um, what are the stories that you're, most excited by?
Mm, Actually, this podcast started as I like talking to people, and
Mhm.
I podcast is a very good medium for doing that. I initially started with a friend, and she gave a lot of contacts, and then I did podcasts with almost like 25 of her contacts, and uh, then I got into my LinkedIn, and from LinkedIn, many people were interested. And when I do the podcast, I usually ask for contacts with the people who I do the podcast. Refer five more people of your contacts who can do the
Right,
podcast with me. So that grows, the network grows, and we have had 70 plus episodes so far. My
right,
motivation is, as I said, talking to people, and the other advantage or the other benefit is that I get to learn a lot of things from talking to different people. So as I was speaking to you in this podcast, when you touched upon uh, so many topics, it's like neurons firing in my brain about, how can I put Pratibha in touch with that person, right, who is working on education psychology.
interesting.
So things like that. And I have spoken to some 7 or 8 education related people. So I have also built a playlist of all the education related podcasts so far. So it's quite interesting to have these different perspectives. I spoke to some people about national education policy, um, and then there is one person who actually started to work as a teacher, and then
Right,
she started to grow into different grades as a teacher, and finally when she became a principal, she started hating that job,
right.
and then she became a director or something like that. She is enjoying. So these different facets of education, which is really great, and I love to talk about those topics. As I said,
Mm.
another topic is about human body medicine and all this stuff. I was just reading some book on microbiology, and I was looking at these different microorganisms and how they are inside us, how they surround us, and how they affect us, and all those things. I was talking to another person who was working on some research about a bacteria that causes the tuberculosis, and how do you ad-
Right.
address that and things like that. So yeah, so all these learnings, all these interesting topics, I guess it's my curiosity which makes me do podcasts. So that's
Amazing,
for answering your question.
amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation. I think it's always nice to be able to reflect on your own journey and kind of, capture it in the smallest possible words, because then just builds more clarity for myself as well. So thank you for that chance.
Oh, no issues, and pleasure is mine because I learned a lot of things from you, and I would also like to put you in touch with some of the other people who are in education, and also some of the organizations which are working on the rural areas. Probably they might be interested in working with your organization also. So um,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for spending time with us in the podcast. I wish you all the best in your life and your work. Please take care and bye for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye. Bye-bye.
That was a great podcast with Dr. Pratibha Narayanan. Please subscribe to this channel and follow it for more awesome podcasts. Opinions expressed by the guests in this podcast are their own. The host or the sponsors of the podcast do not condone the opinions expressed by the guests or the actions arising out of those opinions. Any decisions or actions that the listeners might take as a result of listening to this podcast must be based on their own judgment and will be at their own risk. The podcast host or their sponsors will not be held responsible for the consequences of any actions and or decisions taken as a result of any content in this podcast.